Hello. For the past week, I have been completely immersed in reading a great big epic, and I love that sensation of every time I'm not at work or I'm busy, I just want to get back to this completely gripping story and these characters. So the novel is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, and this won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1986. And I wasn't sure at first if I wanted to read this story because I'm not naturally drawn to westerns, and this is now known as one of the greatest westerns of all time. When I was growing up, my father introduced me to a lot of great films, but he also introduced me to the films of John Wayne, and I was not so into those films. I just sort of felt like a lot of macho swagger to me, and kind of idealization of times when men were men, and that is not my vibe at all. And I mention this because this novel has a really interesting history where Larry McMurtry first came up with the idea for this story in the 1970s, and he was co-authoring a screenplay with Peter Bogdanovich, who he had previously written a screenplay before an adaptation of his book, The Last Picture Show, and they intended this screenplay as a kind of vehicle for the late career of John Wayne and other actors who have famously appeared in a lot of westerns, but it kind of fizzled out. John Wayne wasn't so keen on playing a certain character in the story, and so the screenplay didn't come into fruition, wasn't made into a film. But years later, Larry McMurtry picked up on the idea of this story again and fleshed it out into this great big novel. I think this is one of the biggest novels that I've read all year. But I read it in a relatively short amount of time because, like I said, I was just so gripped by the story. And I don't think a kind of traditional Western, and some have made arguments how it is kind of subverting the form of the Western, because it's definitely not idealizing this time in place. It's set in the 1870s in the West, and it primarily follows two men who are former Texas Rangers. There is Woodrow Call and there is Augustus McCrae. And they are such a great and entertaining duo. Larry McMurtry was inspired by Don Quixote, which of course has one of the greatest double acts of all time. Very different personalities, but they have a strong connection with each other. And we follow these two former Texas Rangers who now own a cattle company and have a group of loyal workers alongside them, some of whom they worked with back in their Texas Ranger days. And we follow this large cast of characters over a long period of time, and the primary events of the story are these two characters who are driving cattle from Texas to the open land in Montana, which they've heard that there's a lot of open grazing land there that hasn't been settled yet, and they want to be amongst some of the first settlers there to establish a cattle ranch, and see it as an opportunity. But it's more about, I think they're more driven by a sense of adventure, and it's about the movement of the journey for them, whereas for many of the other characters it's about for profit, and there are many different subplots in this novel, and many different characters that are introduced along the way. So something that I really appreciated while I was reading this book was that there's not a character list at the beginning of the novel. I wish there was, but there is a very comprehensive character list on the Wikipedia page. So as I was reading this story, I kept referring back to that character list, and I would advise anyone who's reading this to do that if you ever get confused about what character is who, because as I said, there are so many different characters in this story, and lots of idiosyncratic personalities that I did get to know over the course of the story and grew very close to and felt very endeared towards. And because of the time period and this tumultuous landscape, not all of the characters survive, and so part of the grippy nature of this story is to see what happens and who is going to make it through this story. But all of these subplots that involve a lot of romance and revenge. There's a lot of these characters are driven by revenge and kind of settling old scores. But as I said, it doesn't have this kind of, it's not glamorizing, I don't think, this time period and this lifestyle of being cowboys. It shows how there is so much violence and conflict wrapped up into it, and these cowboys do have a real sensitive nature inside as well. There are many moments when the men in this novel are crying, often just sort of crying quietly to themselves off to the side because they don't want to be mocked for showing their emotions, but they do definitely have these emotions. And there are so many beautiful moments of when like Gus just loves looking at the colors of the sky, and he's admiring the sky. And there's another really interesting character named Dietz who in the nighttime he gazes up at the moon, and there's this beautiful section where he's imagining what it would be like to walk on the moon. And even though that there's a lot of maleness in this novel, there are a lot of compelling female characters as well. There's a character named Lorena who's a former prostitute who goes with them on this journey because she wants to find a better life for herself. And there's a really canny and able character named Janie, who some of the characters pick up along the way, who escapes really desperate circumstances. And there is Clara, who's a very independent, strong character that has a complicated past with one of the main characters in this story. And there's another character named Peach, who is very difficult, who's kind of has this ironic nickname to her because she is a really tough character. And part of the drama of this story, in addition to all of the interesting relationships between the characters, is just how hazardous this landscape is. There are torrential rains, and there are nests of snakes, and there are hailstorms, and there are bandits. So that is why it is such a tough life, and why not all of these characters make it through the story. And there are some really stomach-churning scenes of graphic violence in this as well that are so vividly told. But there are also moments of absolute wonder and beauty as well. During one of the lightning storms, the lightning somehow hits one of the horns of the cattle, and the cattle's horns kind of glow in this very strange way. And I was struck too by all of the descriptions of what they eat along the way. These cowboys don't have the best diets. Some of them just sort of subsist on bacon or varmint stew. And many of them are also really physically damaged. It just becomes part of the lifestyle that some will have kind of these gaping holes in their bodies or ears, which are barely hanging on to their heads. But because it's such a tough lifestyle, they just have to sort of carry on with life as it's because this is there's not the amenities for kind of rest or getting or recovering from these many different injuries. And part of what brings this story so much to life is the colloquial language that is used, especially in the dialogue between all of these characters, which really endeared me to so many of them. And even though this made it such a fascinating story for me about a whole lifestyle and area that is so different from my own. I don't think that the novel glamorizes this at all. It's depicting America in a state of transition, and there's a sense of mourning in the background for this, even though these the central characters were Texas Rangers who would hunt down and kill many Native Americans. There's this sense of mourning for the loss of the large Native American populations and the populations of buffalo on the landscape. And there's such a striking line in the novel when he writes, "The Great Plains were truly empty, unpeopled, and ungrazed. Soon the whites would come, of course, but what he was seeing was a moment between, not the plains as they had been or as they would be, but a moment of true emptiness, with thousands of miles of grass resting unused, unoccupied only by remnants of buffalo, the Indians, the hunters." And there's such a strong sense of just a large landscapes that have few people sort of scattered all around, and there are so many characters that are scattered in the different corners of these vast expanses of the West, and these landscapes, and what we get in the story are moments when these characters' lives touch upon one another as they connect, and that does mean that there are quite a few coincidences in this story where characters will meet up with each other after having been scattered around, and you'd think even though there are hundreds of miles between them, that they still do manage to bump into each other, and that did sort of stretch the credibility slightly. Although in one section, it's remarked that it would seem impossible that these characters would meet up with each other, but actually there's only sort of one road going into this small town, which is the only town in the area. So it is kind of natural that some of the characters would meet up with each other in this way. And I was just so drawn into the characters and the events of this story that I didn't care. I just wanted to know what was going to happen and to them, and to spend more time with them. So it's made me really glad to know that Larry McMurtry wrote a number of sequels to this and prequels as well. And so there's more to explore about these characters and these stories. So I'm glad to be able to return to them. And also I've been fascinated, in addition to reading up about the history of this particular novel, about the history of Larry McMurtry himself, and which I hadn't realized that he was co-authored the adapted screenplay for Brokeback Mountain of Annie Proulx's short story, and he won an Oscar for this. And so I went to watch his Oscar speech, which was really wonderful. And he also pays tribute to booksellers, because he was also a bookseller for a lot of his life, and owned a big one of the biggest antiquarian bookstores in the United States. And so I'm so glad that I finally read this great big epic and got over my slight prejudice about Westerns and worry about reading one, because it was such a wonderful experience and I loved it. And I would love to hear if you have read this book and what you think about it, or if you're interested in reading it now, or if you've read any other books by Larry McMurtry that you would recommend to me. I would love to hear about that in the comments below. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.